Well, thank you. I'm actually here. There's actually a bit of confusion there. So basically, we're going to have a very interesting talk now about the technology improving transplants and innovation there. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Dorry Sergev. I'm a transplant surgeon at Johns Hopkins in the US. And I also have, with a background in computer science and statistics, I do a lot of big data work and using the big data that are available to us from transplantation to do risk analytics and policy. And I've been involved with a few congressional bills that I've written that in the effort to move innovation and transplantation forward.
Amazing. And you was the guy that actually did the first HIV to HIV transplant. How did that work?
Yeah, so I'll give you the long answer since
Let's go for that.
The timer says we have some time. So this was a great sort of combination of big data in medicine, innovation in medicine, health policy, integration with health policy, and then taking all of this and bringing it back to our patients. So the story took about 6 years to unfold. I'll try to summarize that in about 3 minutes. But the fact that it took 6 years gives you a sense that doing things that are innovative in medicine does take time, and you have to be patient for policies to change. So about 6 years ago, I realized that we had patients with HIV on our transplant waiting list that were dying, and there were organs potentially for them from donors who had HIV that we were not allowed to use because of the legal restrictions. The laws governing transplantation in the US were written in the 1980s during the AIDS scare, and so obviously they forbid the use of organs from people with HIV, which also meant that the 1 million+ people in the United States who lived with HIV could not sign their donor cards. They knew that they could not be organ donors, which was very disappointing. So we needed to convince Congress that this was something that should be changed, and so we used the big data available in transplantation. So we have databases of every single person registered for a transplant, all of the organ offers that were made, whether people got transplanted, if they did, how long they live, etc. And so what we can do is we can take these big data sources and estimate how many potential donors there would have been, how many lives there would have been saved, and what this would have saved the healthcare system in the United States. So in the US, when we do a transplant, particularly a kidney transplant, we save Medicare money, because otherwise Medicare has to pay for dialysis, which is very expensive. So we were able to make these estimates. It was in the hundreds of millions of dollars, which Congress doesn't listen to much, but they do listen to money saving. And so we were able to convince Congress to pass this bill. Obama signed the bill. And then we were able to do the first HIV to HIV kidney and liver transplants in the United States. And now we've rolled out a national protocol for doing this. And so what started as big data and policy moved to care of patients, which actually will move even further to a better understanding of HIV virology. So this is the first natural experiment that we've ever done where we have somebody with a known strain of HIV, and then we take something with another strain of HIV, and when it's an organ, you know that there's enough of a viral load that it will be transmitted, and then we can study viral dominance. So which strain of the virus will become more dominant, and how will those strains evolve, and how will those strains interact? And by better understanding viral dominance, we will actually be closer to a cure for HIV, because if you understand what makes a virus dominant and what makes another virus less dominant, you understand more about the virus itself.
Great. And so you mentioned there, obviously, that big data was a key in the innovation. How actually did that work? I mean, what was the actual solution that came from the big data?
So we needed to do a few things. One, we needed to estimate how many HIV-positive donors there would be in the United States, and nobody has any record of this.
Exactly, yeah.
So we used claims data from hospital admissions, because to be a donor, you have to die in a hospital from certain mechanisms and not have certain diseases. And we have large-scale national hospital claims data that were not intended for this purpose at all, but we were able to identify in-hospital deaths that didn't have the contraindications to donation and use those estimates. Then, now you have the numbers of donors, and you have the characteristics of the donors. You can use other databases to estimate how many organs from those donors we would expect to be used. And then you can use other databases to estimate how many additional life years the patients would benefit from the transplant, and then use those data with cost data to estimate the cost savings. So drawing data from all sorts of really rich data sources that we have available to us. And I just spoke on a panel at the forum about health policy innovations and things, and one of the things that I said that we're really lacking in medicine today is integration of data systems across care, because hundreds of thousands of patients are being cared for and all of their data is being completely wasted. Yeah. And we don't have these data sources to study. In transplantation in the US, we have all of these data. We have every single person listed for an organ because we need those data for the operational nature of what we do. And then we can use those data to study things like this.
So 2 years ago, my son died from hypoplastic left heart syndrome.
Oh.
And obviously, people have this illusion about transplant. It's forever. You know, it's going to last you for a long time. It's normally about 20 years for a transplant. Do you actually have any data around, obviously, people, obviously, you know, their life expectancy with the transplant inside them?
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your son. So different organs can last different amounts of time. One thing that you need to be aware of is every time we give an estimate of how long an organ will last, this is based on previously observed transplants. Yep. And the field changes, so I don't recognize the field from 10 years ago. Sure. The medications are different, the surgical techniques even have changed, the organ supply has changed, our ability to preserve organs has changed, our ability to regulate the immune system has changed, so whatever it is gets longer and longer. So any estimate we give is generally quite conservative. We estimate that today a kidney transplant on average will last anywhere between 20 to 40 years. Okay. And again, that depends on the age of the donor, whether it was a living donor or a deceased donor, et cetera. Liver transplants can last even longer than that, because once the liver regenerates and, you know, and grafts, then there are very few issues with a liver allograft lasting longer. So we do transplants today with the goal of multiple decades of allograft life. However, we still have issues with threats to the allograft. One of them is, I think actually the biggest issue today is that it is very difficult to take your transplant medications. Yeah. It is difficult to take the few medications that you need to keep the immune system in check. And small transgressions in adherence to medications, what they do is then they start the immune system on these cascades which are very difficult to break. So for example, one of the high-risk age groups today is the early adulthood age group. So if you have a functioning kidney, no matter when you were transplanted, if by age 17 it's functioning, you have a 40% chance that it will no longer be functioning by age 24. That is a huge high-risk window, and the risk, obviously, is adherence to medication. Yeah. Because you let the immune system lapse a little bit, you start to create new antibodies that then we cannot control. Yeah. And so that is really the threat to transplantation today. There is work being done in two major areas in the hopes of fixing this. Yeah. One is intolerance. So instead of suppressing the immune system, you create an environment where the patient has accepted the allograft and is tolerant to the allograft, and there's some very, very interesting, although pilot studies with encouraging results in the tolerance area. And then the other area is manufacturing of organs, obviously. If you can create an organ from somebody's own cells where there won't be an immune response, then this is magical, and this will be an allograft that lasts for life.
So obviously innovation is totally outpacing regulation, and I spoke to the guys backstage about very controversial things such as transgender womb transplants and things like that. Where do you find that you are at the moment with regards to obviously this new ground sort of that people hasn't really explored before? Do you feel that it's going to be take a long time to get there, or it's going to be something that's quite rapid?
Yeah, so in terms of medication innovation, at least in the United States, and it seems that a lot of governments have followed our lead, not necessarily wisely, we have a lot of regulatory oversight in terms of medications, and we see this as a big limiting factor in transplantation. So one problem is that we're pretty good today In fact, we might say we're very good today. And to get from very good to unbelievably good is a small step, but one that requires a huge amount of innovation. The problem is, if you're going to run a clinical trial, which the FDA wants you to do, with the outcome not of rejection, but of death or allograft loss, which is a 10, 15-year outcome, and you're going to go from very good to exceptionally good, that's going to take a huge clinical trial that will take 20 years to run, and nobody wants to do it. So there's a lot of resistance to new drug development and transplantation just because of this regulatory environment where it's almost impossible to prove that you are as good as or even better than the existing agents. Now, on the technology side, there's actually, at least in my opinion, less obstructive regulation because the FDA has a history of medications that have harmed people, et cetera. It's not common that the technology of building some new manufactured organ has caused so much harm that there's that many regulations against that. And we see already a lot of really exciting things happening in development of growing cartilage and growing other things that are they're one step away from functioning organs already.
So I was at a talk with Sam Altman from Y Combinator, and he talked a lot about humans and computers merging and how he's very comfortable with that. Obviously working with the human body daily, how do you feel about that? Do you feel that there will become a time when basically there's machines as opposed to organs itself like being generated to kind of almost essentially replace memories? There's a startup I know in Ireland called Helix Works, and they can actually put your favorite song in your DNA. And you're basically a walking USB stick. And so, I mean, it's getting really almost science fictionist now. And do you feel that we're going to come a time where basically there's going to be, literally a merge between humans and also computers?
If you put my favorite song into my DNA and forced me to listen to this every day, I think it wouldn't be my favorite song anymore. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I also mean that this is the problem with interfacing with technology, is that our understanding of the body changes so much. We look at, for example, genomics. We're only in the very beginning of understanding truly genetic risk factors and epigenetics and all of the complexity of the whole field of genomics, proteomics, et cetera. And if we hard code these things into machines or other things that we can grow, that we can implant, we will limit ourselves dramatically. On the other hand, there are already really good implantable mechanical devices that people use. So, ventricular assist devices. One could easily see the generation of, for example, a mechanical kidney instead of, a grown, one where you take an extracellular membrane and you apply cells to it. So, I think we just need to be careful that what we do in terms of invasive modification of body functions is at least flexible and nimble enough to continue to grow as we change our understanding of things.
Sure. And what is it you're excited about, what you're working on? Is there any kind of revelations you can tell the crowd that is new and is exciting to be talking about?
Well, in transplantation, I really think the exciting area in transplantation, and I'm not working in this because I'm not nearly smart enough to be doing this, is in terms of tissue engineering. I've seen the field grow in the last 20 years, and we used to say about tolerance, we used to say this is the future of transplantation and always will be, meaning that we'll never reach that. I think tissue engineering actually is the future of transplantation. I'm very glad to say that because even with engineered tissues, I will still need to do the operations to put them in, so I won't be out of a job.
And that's actually a good point. So obviously machines are taking all the jobs soon, right? Do you think there'll come a time when machines can carry out, machines can carry out an operation themselves without the need for a doctor?
Yeah, I think the problem with machine assistance, AI, visual assistance, robotic assistance in surgery is very important and hot and something that I think will move the field forward. The problem is you will never be able to replicate what a surgeon does. One, because we're very weird, but two, because this is an art, okay? This is surgery, like dance and music, is an art, and no operation is the same. and no even 5 minutes of a given operation are the same. And our ability to react to this is, I think, orders of magnitude more complex even than a car trying to drive itself down the street. So I don't see the ability to program AI systems to actually carry out operations, but in terms of the assistance that they can provide us in the operating room is very important.
And in terms of personally, so obviously you literally have people's lives in your hands. How do you get away from that when you go home at night? Do you literally not think about work, or do you kind of literally take your job home with you?
Well, so you always take your job home with you, whether or not you're trying to think about work. And I take home the patients that I care for, and the phone will ring, and it doesn't matter where I am and what time it is. And I also take home the research that I do. But I have a very strong life outside of medicine and outside of research. And I was trained as a child as a musician, and I've continued to perform music and to be involved in music. And I've been dancing with my wife for 20 years, and we own a dance studio, and we teach people to dance, and we have sort of a creative outlet outside of medicine, and I think that helps. But we're both very technical people. I think that helps us as well. And
do you listen to music when you're doing operations as well?
Yeah, I listen to the music that I think is would make the most people happy in the operating room, and not necessarily the music that I would want to listen to, but we usually agree on alternative rock. So okay. For any unsigned alt-rock bands out there, you're welcome to come perform in my operating room.
Have we got any in the house? So it's definitely not DJ Khaled and Kanye West in the operating theatre with you?
No, I think my staff would not appreciate if I brought Electric Daisy Carnival to the operating room, although I wish I could.
Right, that's all we've got time for, guys. So can everyone give a big round of applause for this genius we've got here? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.